Today we will look at one of the most shocking and inexplicable tragedies in Japan. This is the story of the Miyazawa family, and the case is still being investigated, even though the crime happened almost 24 years ago. I rarely do this, but today I truly ask those who are faint of heart not to watch this video because the details of the story are genuinely horrifying. And to everyone else, welcome to my channel, where we explore real crimes and strange phenomena together. If you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to subscribe, and let's dive into today's story. New Year in Japan, just like in Russia, is considered one of the most important holidays, when families gather together to celebrate and mark the beginning of a new era. On December 30th, 2000, the Miyazawa family spent the day like many other families in Tokyo, preparing together to welcome the end of the year. The morning began with the parents waking up the children. Yasuko made a light breakfast, and they all sat down at the table together, discussing their plans for the coming year. Later, the whole family went out for New Year's shopping, strolling along the bustling streets decorated with festive lights and stopping by stores to buy everything they needed for the New Year's table. They laughed, picked out gifts, and generally enjoyed the holiday atmosphere. After returning home, Yasuko prepared lunch, and they all sat down at the table together, sharing a warm family moment. After that, they unpacked their purchases and began decorating the house. The children hung up garlands and ornaments with particular enthusiasm. In the evening, the family talked with relatives on the phone, making plans to celebrate New Year's together the next day. The head of the family, 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa, worked in the field of marketing. And New Year's, as you can imagine, is one of the busiest times of the year. That's why he would periodically check his computer throughout the day so he could respond to work emails if necessary. While he was doing that, his wife Yasuko entertained their two children, 8-year-old Nina and her younger brother Rei. After dinner, they spent the evening watching TV and then finally went to bed. And then, at about 11:30 at night, when all four of them were already asleep in their beds, a dark figure slowly emerged from the depths of the park that bordered the back of their house. This person silently stepped out from the shadows of the trees and entered the family's property. Although in Japan it is considered normal to leave doors unlocked since the country is quite safe, on this day the front door was closed. So the intruder climbed a tree, reached out and opened the bathroom window on the second floor, entering the house. Once inside, the intruder went to the nearest bedroom where Rei was sleeping and strangled the boy with his bare hands. This terrible act likely caused a lot of noise, which woke Mikio and made him immediately run upstairs from the first floor. The fight that broke out between Mikio and the attacker was brief and brutal. The attacker was armed with a Japanese santoku kitchen knife, which he used to stab the father of two repeatedly in the head with such force that the tip of the blade broke off and became deeply lodged in the victim's skull. Before he died, Mikio managed to injure the perpetrator slightly, but he was ultimately unable to overpower him. The man was simply too strong. When his lifeless body, like a ragdoll, fell backward down the stairs, the killer followed after him. He went down to the first floor where, seized by some kind of animal madness, he attacked the already dead body again, repeatedly stabbing and tearing the flesh with a broken knife, as if he wanted to erase even the very memory of his victim. Finally, when he was done, he went to the kitchen, took another knife, and then went back up to the second floor. There he attacked Yasuko and her daughter. His attacks were not just brutal, they carried something demonic, as if all his rage and hatred were directed specifically at them. Each blow was more ferocious than the last, with a clear intent to inflict the maximum suffering before finally ending their lives. Later, investigators would discover that he spent much more time and effort on Yasuko and Nina, and their deaths were far more terrifying than those of the father and his son. Seemingly having already achieved his goal, the killer nevertheless went outside and cut the phone line, likely to prevent any attempts to call for help or contact the outside world in case someone had survived or was hiding inside. He understood that the phone could become an important means for the victims to call for help in time, and decided to deprive the house of its last means of communication. However, after this, the killer did not hurry to escape. It was as if he had lost all sense of time, and for the next several hours he wandered aimlessly around the house, performing a series of almost absurd and mundane actions. Ignoring the bodies of his four victims, he calmly went about bandaging his own wounds. He made no attempt to clean up the blood or hide the used bandages. On the contrary, he left them right on the floor, as if he wanted the authorities to find everything exactly as he had left it. Then he moved to the kitchen, where he made himself some tea, as if he were an ordinary guest. He took slices of melon from the refrigerator and 4 ice creams from the freezer, savoring these small pleasures amid the horror he himself had created. Later, he lay down on one of the sofas in the living room and took a nap. After waking up, he briefly turned on Mikio's computer and then used the bathroom, not even bothering to flush after himself. Then, in the early hours of the new year, he finally left that house. On December 31st, 2000, at 11 o'clock in the morning, Yasuko's mother tried to call her daughter's family to arrange New Year's plans. However, the call wouldn't go through. As you may recall, the phone lines had been cut, though she didn't know that yet. Worried, Yasuko's mother went to their house and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. There was no movement or sound in the house. Feeling a deep sense of anxiety, she used her keys to enter the house. A horrifying scene immediately unfolded before her eyes. At the foot of the stairs leading to the second floor lay the body of Mikio Miyazawa, the 44-year-old head of the family. Yasuko's mother began calling out for the family, but there was only silence in response. She went up the stairs and saw the body of her daughter Yasuko. She was 41, and her granddaughter Nina, who was only 8. Driven mad with terror, she touched their bodies, as if hoping that all of this was just a nightmare that would soon end. And in this state of complete confusion, she went into the next room, the one right next to Yasuko and Nina's bodies, and there she found Rei, lying in his bed. He had been strangled, and it was this that led investigators to believe he was the first victim of this brutal crime. The police quickly discovered that the killer had left a broken murder weapon at the scene, which bore traces of both his own blood and the blood of his victims. He also inexplicably forgot a small bag lying on the floor, in which markers and a small amount of sand were found. All these items were seized and sent for forensic examination in the hope of identifying the killer. Although the fibers from the clothing found provided important clues about the perpetrator, it quickly became clear that finding him would not be easy. DNA and fingerprints were found and analyzed, but they did not match any records in Japan's national database. Looking at the crime scene photographs spread out on the table in his dimly lit office, Takeshi Tsuchida felt focused, yet at the same time filled with deep frustration. It had already been a week since the elderly woman discovered the bodies of her family, brutally murdered in their own home, and the investigation had still yielded no results. Someone had managed to do all this and disappear without leaving behind any traces clear enough to catch them. As the chief of the police station, Tsuchida inevitably found himself at the center of this high-profile case, having received orders to resolve it as quickly as possible. At first glance, it seemed like everything would be simple. Personal belongings and evidence left behind by the perpetrator promised to provide the key to their identity. However, as I already mentioned, the DNA did not match any record in the national database, effectively becoming an insurmountable obstacle to an obvious solution. The situation required a different approach, so his team turned to eyewitness testimonies and surveillance camera footage. But even then, it turned out they were moving blindly. The killer did not appear on any of the cameras surrounding the house, and the witnesses were unable to provide anything that could be used. In a very systematic and cold-blooded manner, this person avoided all possible traps, as if he knew their every move in advance. This fact only heightened the anxiety and the sense that they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than an ordinary criminal. Analysis showed that the killer was a man of mixed descent, with one parent likely originating from southern Europe. His blood was identified as type A, and based on the nature of the wounds inflicted on his victims, it was assumed that he was a right-handed man of slender build, about 170 centimeters tall. The analysis of the force used in the murders indicated an age range from 15 to 35 years old. But apart from that, nothing more definite could be confirmed. And that's very strange, don't you think? I also found information that the police discovered more than 1,000 pieces of evidence at the crime scene. Fingerprints, footprints, clothing, a santoku knife, blood, and just a ton of the killer's biomaterial like hair and so on. And none of this led the investigation anywhere. Apologies to anyone who's eating, but the police even took a sample of his feces left at the crime scene for analysis, because as you remember, he didn't flush after himself. And the analysis showed that at some point before the murders, the man had eaten a simple meal of green beans and sesame seeds. It was later confirmed that both the kitchen knife used in the murders and the clothes the killer wore were purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan, which is about an hour's drive away. Over time, the police learned that only 130 pieces of the sweater worn by the killer had been manufactured and sold. And this was great news, because with this single check, they had narrowed down the circle of suspects to an absolute minimum. However, unfortunately, their investigation led only to 12 buyers of these sweaters who were obviously in no way connected to the killer. Perhaps the most surprising and intriguing piece of evidence regarding the attacker's identity, you won't believe it, was the detailed analysis of the sand found in the abandoned bag. You might wonder, what does sand have to do with anything? Well, scientists managed to determine that this sand was from the Nevada desert in California, more specifically from the area around Edwards Air Force Base. Well, since the murders, many different hypotheses have been put forward about who could have been responsible for the senseless killing of this young and seemingly unremarkable family. These hypotheses vary in plausibility, but unfortunately, there is so little evidence that none of the theories seems any more likely than the others. The most common hypothesis suggests that the family fell victim to a stalker, possibly someone consumed by manic jealousy or a pathological attachment to one of the family members. The obvious disparity in the severity of injuries inflicted on the female members of the family compared to the male members led some psychologists to conclude that the killer may have harbored a deep hatred of women, possibly triggered by a personal tragedy or unfulfilled emotions. It is possible that it was a man obsessed with Yasuko Miyazawa or an acquaintance of the family who felt he had once been wronged or humiliated. There is also information that Yasuko's face was covered with a futon, and according to one of the articles about this case, in Japan, after death, it is customary to cover only those people whom you know. Nevertheless, the investigation into all possible suspects and interviews with the family's friends and relatives did not yield any significant results, and these theories remained mere speculation. If the Miyazawa family had ever been involved in any conflict in the past, it has not yet been discovered. Or has it been discovered after all? One of the theories suggests that the tragedy was caused by the open space behind the Miyazawa family's house. There were rumors that the authorities had offered the family up to 100 million yen to move out, so they could demolish their house and expand the park. Also, according to some witnesses, a few weeks before his death, Mikio had a conflict with a group of young people at the local skateboarding area. So it's possible that the conflict led some street gang to decide to take revenge for what they saw as a sign of disrespect. Another popular theory is that the killer could have been a migrant or a homeless person, or a drifter if you prefer. The Miyazawa family's house, like many others in Japan, was just a few minutes' walk from the train station, which led to the idea that the perpetrator was traveling around the country using the extensive railway network. Since the 1980s, Japan has faced an increase in migration from neighboring Asian countries, as well as a rise in the number of people who lost their homes. In the 1990s, Japan, like many other countries, went through a serious economic crisis. Many people lost their jobs and were never able to return to a normal life. Some of them began to lead a nomadic lifestyle, refusing to return to a society that, in their view, had betrayed them. It is possible that the killer was one of these people, and the Miyazawa family's house was chosen at random, simply being the first one he came across as he left the park. It is also possible that he saw them at the store when they were shopping for the new year and decided to follow them, with all the consequences that entailed. One of the theories concerns the sand found in the bag. This sand was identified as material from the Nevada desert near Edwards Air Force Base. This suggests that the killer might have been connected to the American military. Some commentators have claimed that the perpetrator may have been one of the 50,000 American servicemen stationed in Japan at the time, and unfortunately, history shows that American military personnel have repeatedly been involved in high-profile crimes, which has led to public outrage and demands for their withdrawal from the country. By the way, I once made a video on this topic, the Rina Shimabukuro case. If you're interested, the link will be in the description. So this theory could also explain the mixed DNA profile found at the crime scene. And now, as 2024 comes to an end, the investigation is still ongoing, as if it stretches beyond the bounds of time. The latest update on this case was on May 24th of this year, when the administration of the district where the tragedy occurred requested permission from Tokyo to use the perpetrator's DNA. And to be honest, it feels as if there is no hope of solving this crime or catching the perpetrator. Moreover, as you know, there are statutes of limitations for crimes. In Japan, for example, it's 30 years for crimes punishable by death, and 20 years for life imprisonment. So, write which theory seemed the most realistic to you, and share your opinion. And I have to say, without my favorite sponsors on Boosty, this